Welcome to the Education Committee. My name is Deirdre Bartman, Chair of the Education Committee. I just want to confirm, Mr. Assam, are we on YouTube and recording?
Hi, Chair. Good afternoon. We are live. Thank you, Thiraj.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Colleagues, I want to thank you for being with us this afternoon. Today, we are dealing with a briefing by the Finance. Just going to quickly mute everyone. Let me just mute everyone, sorry. Okay. Today, we are dealing with the briefing by the Finance and Fiscal Commission in terms of the constitutional provisions that they are established, sections 220 to 222. There are some others, but those are the most important, on the costing and proposed costing on the Basic Education Laws Amendment Bill B2B 2022 NCOP. And afterwards, I also just have some feedback from members. Just for some context, for those who are joining us today, the FFC, as they are known, is a constitutional institution established by Chapter 13 of the Constitution. The establishment is through Section 220. I'm just going to again mute everyone. Okay. The establishment is through Section 220 of the Constitution. And this is then also followed by Section 3 of the Financial and Fiscal Commission Act number 99 of 1997 that deals with the type of advice that they give as well. I just want to read it out because I think this is quite important for what I have to say next. Section 3 of the Act indicates subsection 1, the Commission acts as a consultative body for and makes recommendations and gives advice to organs of state in the national, provincial and local spheres of government on financial and fiscal matters. Subsection 2, the Commission must perform the functions mentioned in subsection 1 to the extent that its performance of those functions are envisaged in the Constitution and required by national legislation, and may perform those functions on its own initiative or on request of an organ of state. The Commission must be impartial. No person or organ of state may interfere with the functioning of the Commission. All organs of state, when appropriate, must assist the Commission to perform its functions effectively, and the Commission must submit tabling copies of all its recommendations made in terms of a provision of the Constitution to both Houses of Parliament and to the provincial legislatures. Colleagues, on the 2nd of February, the DBE indicated to us that National Treasury has confirmed budget for the Basic Education Laws Amendment Bill and recommended that National Treasury brief us. After that, we invited National Treasury to brief us, which was going to be yesterday. And last week, the committee received a letter from National Treasury indicated that two things. One, that the legislation is regarded as unfunded in terms of the PFMA, and they quoted the respective sections, and that letter was tabled last week in committee. And secondly, that they are unable to brief the committee on a bill that essentially does not belong to them, as it is introduced by the Department of Basic Education. So the Department of Basic Education will then, we will have them in committee on Friday as they have asked for postponement. This meeting, as well as the upcoming meeting on Friday, follows the concerns from both members and members of the public regarding the possible costing, financial implications, and the source of funding for the Bella Bill. And I was having a conversation with one of the FFC officials earlier today, and I'm informed that this essentially is the first time ever that the FFC will be briefing a legislature or parliament, and I'm not sure about the national parliament, but at least provincially, on the financial implications or the fiscus on a non-money bill or financial bill. So colleagues, I hope you know that today the Western Cape Provincial Parliament's Education Committee is making history. I'm going to ask the members just please introduce themselves, and then I'm going to hand over to the FFC delegation for introduction, and we're going to jump straight into the presentation that was sent, followed by questions and answers. Members, you may now introduce yourselves.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon to the FFC officials. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Christopher Fry. I'm a member of this committee.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Conrad Pool. I'm a member of this committee.
Good afternoon,
you.
Chair. Felon Christians, member of this committee.
Thank you so much. I just want to check if there are any other members in the panel online. I don't see any others. Ms. Hassan Musa, do you have any apologies for us? Just remember to unmute. Ms. Hassan Musa, are you able
Sorry,
to hear
Chair,
me?
I had a little bit technical difficulty there. My apologies. The question was, sorry?
Any apologies from other members?
No, member Christopher Fry is in the meeting, so everyone is accounted for and we are a quorum. Apologies again, Chair.
No problem. I also haven't received any other apologies. But with that, I just want to say to the FFC, who's also sent us probably the biggest delegation that I've ever encountered, including those coming to budget. Thank you so much for being with us today and helping us make finance fun again. Over to you.
Good afternoon, Honorable Chair and members, and thank you very much kindly. My name is Chen Tsang, Head of Research of the Financial and Fiscal Commission. I'm here representing our chairperson, Dr. Patience Mbeko-Mbava. And as on behalf of the Commission, we really appreciate the significance, no less, of this first briefing on a matter that is essentially determining the financial and fiscal flows and intergovernmental fiscal relations of the province, and outside of the usual finance and budget committees. Indeed, we basically appreciate this opportunity also on the front of the fact that that the committee appreciate or sees this not just a education only bill. It has everything in the facts of the government in its doings and activities have financial implications, significant ones, especially for the provinces. So we do appreciate that, and also we somewhat. We weren't aware, but I do think that we shall take it up as well, because we are essentially advisors to oversight body of the country and to the legislature. We note that to some degrees there has been that coordination failures, especially at the national sphere, always pushing the issues and bills to someone else's backyard. There's nothing, there's no one's backyard here. It's everybody's backyard here, because it's everyone's budget, and it's the people's budget. It's South Africa's budget. With that further ado, let me share slides, and then I shall quickly further go into the presentation. Going this slide just very quickly to go do an overview of our mandates in terms of the Constitution. Thank you also, Honourable Chair, for having gone into our FFC Act. But essentially, our mandate extends far beyond just the divisional revenue, or the divisional revenue bill as it is, but overall the fiscal framework, and also the IGFR systems and relations, all encompassing. As you can see here, the equitable share is only one of them. Conditional grant, of course, is being another, but also government guarantees, provincial taxes. So effectively, as you said correctly, so all financial and fiscal matters of affecting the country and all spheres concerned. With this bill, or this essentially changes a lot of things. Apart from which the powers and the delegations and authorizations of the aspects of education to the DGs, the HODs, national, provincial specifically, but most importantly, and I think one which as FFC we share the concerns, which I think already alluded to by Honourable Chair and members of this legislature, is that it ultimately affects the financial arrangements, right? Is it funded? And also, it's not just about adding a grade to the formal educational system. We need infrastructure. There's education infrastructure. In fact, there has been backlog grants specifically for that purpose. There's infrastructure grants, of course, you're all well aware of in the for education, the EIG, and in between those various other the nutrition grants and so forth. So, as FFC, we are quite concerned that it seems so easy to just add a grade, make it a longer timeline or continuation of and development of the child and child's schooling system. But there are all these, it should come and considered and planned and funded as a package deal. And also to the extent that it is intergenerational, because I hope you will also agree that education is an intergenerational issue. It's an intergenerational investment. The grades that, or the aspect that we didn't fund for just 1 year, that gap or that unfunded mandate, sometimes we just call it that, flows on, because a grade will go into the next grade, and then the time goes by, and then the new year, and that ultimately affects compounded. I don't know if some of us are more investment minded, compounded towards to affect their lives, actually livelihoods, and also employability in the future. But I shall then, at this point, just lay in the text, context and the content before you of this bill. And in terms of the details, let me hand over to our research specialist, Ms. Sasha Peters, and the team, Neo and Fabrice, later in the presentation. Please take over, Sasha. Then thank you again, Chair and honourable members.
Thank you, Chen, and thank you, Chen, and good afternoon, Chair, members of the committee, and other colleagues on the platform. So we start off our submission this afternoon by just sketching the context within which basic education is delivered in South Africa. And as members will know, from a constitutional and policy perspective, basic education is afforded a very high priority, with the right to basic education being enshrined in Section 29(1)(a) of the Bill of the Constitution. And unlike the majority of the socioeconomic rights contained in the Bill of Rights, the right to basic education is not subject to the limitation of progressive realization or available resources. Then in terms of South Africa's long-term development plan, the National Development Plan, or NDP, an entire chapter is dedicated to education, and again, the importance of the role of basic education in building the foundation for lifelong learning carries throughout that chapter. With the NDP also emphasizing the importance of an integrated education system that can effectively tie together early childhood development, or ECD, as well as primary, secondary, and tertiary or further education. Then in terms of the institutional or service delivery architecture, responsibility for basic education is shared between the national and provincial governments, where the national sphere focuses largely on the development of policy, regulations, and oversight, while the domain of provinces is actual implementation. Now, up until 2009, basic and higher education were a single department, but then In 2009, these two arms of the education system were separated into two, and so we now have the Department of Basic Education and the Department of Higher Education and Training. There has always been a bit of a disjunct between early childhood education, or ECD, and the rest of the education system, where ECD has more been viewed as a component of social welfare. But as members will know, this changed in 2022 when the ECD function was officially shifted from the Department of Social Development to the Department of Basic Education. Now, this shift is very critical as there's much evidence both internationally and locally here in South Africa that shows the importance of access to quality ECD and how such access can positively influence the performance of learners throughout the human capital development pipeline. So from the perspective of the FFC, we really see this shift as an opportunity to fully integrate the package of basic education being delivered to our children. And just as, basic education has traditionally received policy as well as budget priority, we will hopefully see the same happening to ECD, which has been a somewhat neglected component of education. Moving to the next slide, please. So going back to the theme of prioritization, I mentioned the constitutional and policy priority attached to basic education. And on this slide, we wanted to illustrate the budget priority attached to the sector. So the table on that slide shows consolidated expenditure by function, and it's taken from the latest 2024 Division of Revenue. And it provides a sense of the budget allocated to each of the key sectors. Basic education falls within the learning and culture category. That category receives 1/5 of all consolidated expenditure. And along with basic education, higher education, training, as well as art, culture, and recreation also fall in that learning and culture functional category. Now, within that category, allocations to basic education dominate. Basic education receives more than double the allocation to higher education and training. And as of 2024, the basic education sector is projected to receive 324 billion, while higher education and training will receive 144 billion, and arts, culture, and recreation is set to receive 12 billion. Now, looking at the third row from the bottom within that table, there's a line called debt service costs, which represent the interest payments on South Africa's debt. And as members will note, the amount of 382 billion for interest payments is larger than the allocations to our key sectors, including basic education, health, social protection, and healthcare. So this just hints at the very strained fiscal environment that we find ourselves in. But despite the constraints that we're facing, basic education has to a certain degree been protected from cuts. And in fact, not only is basic education the largest item in the learning and culture category, it's also projected to be the fastest growing expenditure item in that category. So we see basic education projected to grow by an annual average growth rate of 4.7% over the next 3 years, whilst higher education and arts and culture are projected to grow by 2.5% and 0.6% respectively. Now, despite receiving significant policy and budget prioritization, as we know, the outcomes associated with the sector are less than optimal. And the poor reading for meaning of grade 4s, is a prime example of our less than optimal performance. Can we please move to the next slide? So this slide, Chair, summarizes what the Basic Education Laws Amendment Bill, or BELA Bill, is all about. And essentially, the BELA Bill aims to make amendments to two key pieces of basic education legislation. The first is the South African Schools Act, and the second is the Employment Educators Act. Then what are those amendments? Well, broadly speaking, there are important amendments to grade R. Importantly, the proposed amendment will expand the sorry,
there you go.
Sorry. So there are important amendments regarding grade R. Importantly, the proposed amendments will expand the definition of what constitutes basic education. Previously, basic education ranged from grade 1 to grade 12. Now with the proposed amendments, we might see basic education start with grade R, moving all the way up until grade 12. Then the bill also proposes to make attendance of grade R compulsory, and there are also now penalties being proposed for anyone who prevents a learner from attending school. Then there are also amendments which effectively expand the powers of the head of a provincial department, and these include the right to approve language and admission policies of schools. The amendments speak to prohibiting corporal punishment and also provides for a centralized learner-teacher support material procurement approach. Then on the side of the Employment of Educators Act, given the separation of the higher education and training component from the basic education sector back in 2009, this legislation now removes all references related to higher education and training, such as your FET and adult basic education and training. It removes it from the Employment of Educators Act. So just in a nutshell summarizes the content of the bill. Now, moving to the next slide, please, Chair. Now, the request of the committee was to look at the proposed costing of the bill, and we looked at the Department of Basic Education's projections regarding the anticipated costs of implementing the bill, and the DBE's costing focused mainly on the fact that we are making grade R compulsory and thus adding an additional year of compulsory education, and we therefore honed into that quite a bit. I'd also like to note that this amendment is in line with the National Development Plan, which sets a target of universal access to 2 years of ECD. So with this act, we are progressively moving in the right direction, in terms of making ECD, or at least grade R, compulsory. So according to the DBE's costing exercise, the impact of the proposed amendments would relate mainly to the need for greater educators and classrooms. And before I hand over, Chair, to my colleagues to take you through the DBE's cost projections and the FFC's comments thereon, we just wanted to give members just a very quick overview of the funding of basic education. And the reason we take this approach is that we wanted to impress upon members the constrained nature of the basic education sector, and the lackluster performance of the sector in terms of delivery and outputs. And the fact that despite, the merits attached to making grade R compulsory, we must also be cognizant of the fact that the implementation of these amendments will be putting further a burden on the system, and additional resources are definitely, new money is required to ensure proper implementation of the bill. So moving to the next slide. Thank you. Spending on the implementation of basic education happens at the level of the 9 provinces. And the pie chart on this slide shows the division of total provincial revenue by sector. And as members will see, the main priority at provincial level is your basic education, which is allocated 42% of resources, so that green piece of the pie. And this is followed by health at 34%, public works, roads and transport and at 9.5%, and so forth. And it's important to point out that the main funding source for enabling this implementation is the provincial equitable share allocation, which each of the 9 provinces received from national government. Then the provincial education budget itself is divided into 7 programs, as you can see in the table at the bottom of that slide. The largest program is the Public Ordinary Schools program, which is allocated 239 billion across the 9 provinces. And this program contains the resources allocated to primary and secondary schooling, and it receives on average 78% of total provincial education budgets. So that program dominates. Then there's also an early childhood development, or ECD, budget program, which is aimed at making provision for ECD. And the last column in that table indicates the proportion of the budget allocated to the ECD program. And as is visible there, the ECD program is allocated 3.1% of the total provincial education budgets across the 9 provinces. And ECD, that effectively makes ECD the second smallest component in provincial education budgets. It receives just under half the proportion of the budget allocated, for example, to the administration program. And this, serves to highlight just how historically there's been sort of low prioritization of ECD, even when prior to it getting to the Department of Basic Education. Moving to the next slide, please. Then this slide just provides a bit more detail on that ECD budget program. The table on the bottom left of the slide shows the proportional allocation of each province's total education budget to that ECD program. And looking at the second last column of that table, we can see that nationally, the average allocation as at 2024-25 is projected at 3.4% of the total provincial education budget. Some provinces are above that average, such as the Western Cape, which is projected to allocate 4% of its provincial education budget to ECD. And then, of course, some provinces allocate a significantly smaller portion of their budget to ECD. And one such example is the Limpopo province, where 1.9% of its education budget is allocated to ECD. Now, the bulk of the funding in that ECD program is allocated to grade R offered in public schools. And so 95% of the funding available for grade R is allocated to grade R offered at public schools. And then a relatively smaller portion is provided to ECD's grade R offered in ECD centers, and that goes as a subsidy to those ECD centers. So, Chair, that was just to give a sort of high-level overview of how the budget and allocations, what they look like. And with your permission, I'll hand over to my colleague, Neo, who will take you through the next section of the presentation, which focuses on the personnel-related costs associated with implementing the bill. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair, and good afternoon, members. I'll take you through the next slide that focuses on the cost with regards to the personnel cost with regards to the implementation of the bill. So this part of the presentation looks into personnel costs that will emanate from implementing this bill. It is worth noting from the graphs, it is worth noting that expanding compulsory schooling by a year to include grade R is cost inclusive. And concerning cost and estimate, we see from the graph that an estimate of 5.3 billion will be required, which is propelled by an objective to firstly align ECD educator salaries with what is benchmarked in the basic education sector. Secondly, appointing additional grade R educators due to anticipated enrollment increases. So in terms of addressing existing levels of disparities in educator salaries, it is indicated in the table below on the far left that including grade R in compulsory schooling will will require about 9,767 ECD educators that are brought in line with conditions of service of educators in the broader basic education sector. However, qualification levels, as we see from the graph on the far left, that with regards to relative quality education quality value for grade R educators, with REQV of 10 to 12, it will require 13,791 educators, and with REQV of 13 plus will require 5,976 educators. So, however, qualification levels will inform remuneration decisions. On the other hand, according to the relative education qualification values as shown in the table below on the far right, an estimate of 2.6 billion will be required recurringly on an annual basis to address levels of disparity in educator salaries. And it is also suggested that the annual cost of living adjustment ought to be accounted for in the total cost. Next slide, please. Concerning the appointment of additional grade R educators, we see that when assuming a teacher-learner ratio of 1 teacher is to 40 learners, an estimate of additional 6,560 grade R educators will be required. And in that 6,560, we see from the table below that Gauteng accounts for the largest share, then the Northern Cape for the lowest share. So in terms of cost, as indicated in the table below, the total cost associated with additional teacher requirement is about 2.7 billion, which will go on an annual basis, however, recurringly. Next slide, please. So in terms of this slide, the Commission makes the following comments concerning the personnel-related cost implications of the bill. Firstly, it is imperative to note that the delivery of basic education is labor-intensive, and the compensation of employees is the main cost driver. Therefore, expanding the number of years of compulsory education to include grade R necessitates the appointment of additional educators. We also see from the 2024 Division of Revenue Bill that personnel costs account for 74% of the provincial education spending, for which we see that from the graph below on the total compensation as a proportion of total provincial education budget. We see that the compensation as a percentage of the total basic education allocation declined from 77.6 to 77.3 in 2020 in 74.3 in 2024-25 period. So we see that with the ECD personnel responsible for only 2% of the total basic education personnel spending. Given that the personnel-related cost implications do not factor in the cost of living adjustment COLA, the estimated financial implications can be seen as conservative. However, it must be noted that the impact of COLA adjustment is significant, as it had fiscus-wide repercussions, as we had seen the government having to reprioritize to assist provinces in covering the carry-through costs associated with wage increase agreements. With additional moving forward with additional grade R educator numbers based on primary school norm of an educator-learner ratio of 1:40, it is important that the ECD educator-learner ratio of 1 teacher is to 30 learners be taken into consideration. However, this still propels some of the concerns from the Commission. And the first concern is that will the educator-learner ratio of 1 educator is to 40 learners assist in promoting an environment conducive to quality learning, also noting that these are children in their early years of learning, and therefore the one-on-one teaching method is required. The second concern raised is that does the planning and personnel-related implications factor in teaching assistant? The Commission believes that with an educator-learner ratio of 1 educator is to 40 learners, teaching assistant could play a significant role in this regard. I'll give in to my colleague Fabrice to continue with the presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Good afternoon, Chair and honourable members. So I'll take you through the infrastructure-related cost implication of the implementation of the Bella Bill. So with the expanding compulsory schooling to include grade R, this will necessitate additional school infrastructure requirements. Now, if we look at the national level, of the 23,277 schools in South Africa, 70.1% or 16,471 schools offer grade R. Now, if we delve into the numbers a bit further, what we'll see is that 6,059 schools have grade R classes, 1,555 schools use other means to provide for grade R. So that can be anything from the provision of a mobile classrooms or the conversion of ordinary classrooms into grade R classrooms. 969 schools have plans to introduce grade R classes over the medium term. And the key figure we would like to highlight here is that 7,888 schools require grade R classes. Now, Chair and honorable members, if I can direct your attention to the chart at the bottom of the slide. So this shows the infrastructure at the provincial level. And the two key takeaways that we'd like to make on this chart is that if we look at the total schools with grade R classes at the provincial level, KwaZulu-Natal ranks as the highest in terms of provinces that have the highest number of schools with grade R classes. On the other hand, we see that Eastern Cape is a province that has the highest numbers of schools that will require grade R classes. So that figure is at 2,366. Now, if we look at the DBE estimates for what the additional infrastructure requirements will amount to, so that figure is estimated at 12.4 billion. Now, the potential funding sources to cover this infrastructure need include the provincial equitable share, the education infrastructure grant, and the school's infrastructure backlogs grant. Next slide, please. If we delve into those two grants a bit further, the education infrastructure grant, which is a Schedule 4A grant, means that provinces need to supplement the allocations with their own contributions from the PES. Now, as shown on the chart at the top right of the screen, the education infrastructure grant allocations between 2011 to 2012 to 2022 to 23 have amounted to 111 billion rand. But as the graph shows, the growth in these allocations has been quite erratic over this period. Now, given the strained financial and fiscal environment that we currently sit in, contributions by provinces are likely to be limited, which means that provinces rely entirely on the EIG to fund school infrastructure. Now, if we focus our attention to the school infrastructure backlog grant, this grant was introduced in the 2011-2012 financial year as a temporary intervention, which is supposed to have a high impact. Now, as you can see from the graph on the right bottom of the screen, between the 2011-2012 and 2022-23 period, the allocations to the SIBG were amounted to 24 billion. And of this 24 billion, 76% was spent by provinces. Now, this grant has, the life of this grant has been extended numerous times, even though it was supposed to be a temporary intervention. And this extension has been due to the fact that a number of projects have not been complete. Next slide, please. If we look at the provision of infrastructure, so that is governed by the minimum uniform norms and standards underpinning public school infrastructure. Now, while we've seen improvements in the provision of public school infrastructure, most provinces have yet to fulfill the requirements as outlined in the school infrastructure norms of standards. Now, there are still a number of areas of concerns when it comes to the provision of public school infrastructure. So firstly, there's concerns around the quality of infrastructure. So, for example, the pit latrines are still a reality in some schools, as shown in the figure at the left side of the screen, where you'll see that Eastern Cape, that figure stood at 30% in 2019 and has come down to 10%. But overall, we see that even though the percentage of schools with pit latrines have come down, it's still a reality, meaning that it's something that is yet to be fully eradicated. There's also concerns about the lack of certain types of infrastructure available at the school. So by that, we mean things like laboratories, libraries, computers, and sporting facilities. Now, the key question here that the FFC would like to pose is that, does the government possess the necessary resources and capabilities to fund and oversee the development of quality ECD infrastructure that is aligned to the infrastructure norms? And apart from the need for additional classrooms, as outlined in the financial implication analysis, there's also the need for age-appropriate evolution facilities that would need to be built to accommodate the greater number of grade R learners. Now, this is something that we have not come across in the financial implication analysis of this bill. In addition to this, there's also infrastructure related to the security, given that those learners are quite young and there would be the need to ensure their safety at schools. Next slide, please. So, Chair and honorable members, the FFC would also like to pose some additional considerations around the billable implementation. So the first one relates to learner-teacher support materials. So by that we mean things like library books, charts, models, and stationery. And as you'll see on the chart on the slide, the ECD program accounts for, on average, 3.8% of total learner-teacher support spending across the 9 provincial education budgets, and that's over the 2010, 2011, 2020, and 21 period. So that is something that is still quite low and should be considered when it comes to the implementation of this bill. The second point we'd like to raise is that on learner transport. So the learner transport demand is influenced by a number of factors, including growth in learner numbers, learners migrating within and between provinces, school rationalization, school infrastructure plans not keeping pace with the proliferation of informal settlements, and the expansion of residential areas. Now, what we've witnessed in this regard is that there has been a widening gap between the learners who are eligible for learner transport and those who actually receive it. In relation to both the learner transport and learner teacher support material, we also see there's relative rigidity of provincial revenue bases. So that requires provinces to redirect their spending towards the most pressing needs. Now, for schools that are unable to supplement their government funding with revenues from school fees, this would entail that there are less funds for essential and educational inputs like learner teacher support material and learner transport. And overall, the increase in the learner numbers will require additional funding to be allocated to the basic education sector. Next slide, please. The third consideration we'd like to highlight here is that on National School on Nutrition Program. So the NSNP provides for the nutrition of poor school children, which is aimed at enhancing their ability to learn and increasing their attendance at schools. Now, this is done through a free daily meal to learners in the poorest 60% of schools, so quantiles 1 to 3. Now, what this additional or this expansion of the compulsory school attendance to grade R will mean that there will be upward pressure on the demand for an SNP. Now, we'd like to ask, has this been something that has been factored into the implementation cost of the billable? Fourthly, we'd also like to highlight consideration around learners with special needs. Now, this is something that will arise given that the increased number of grade R learners, And these special needs students would require a specific type of learner teacher support material, such as assistive devices. So this is something that we would like to raise and highlight if it has been considered by the Department of Basic Education in the cost implications of the bill. And lastly, the last consideration relates to the cost of appointing administrative staff in provincial education departments. So in addition to the grade R educators, the provincial educator departments are likely to need additional staff to help assist in the areas of assessing school admission. So that's amendment of Section 5 of the bill, and language school policies, an amendment of Section 7, as well as staff to conduct pre-registration consultations with home education applicants. And that's related to Section 51 of the bill. So through you, Chair, I'll hand back over to my colleague Sasha to conclude our presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Fabrice. So, Chair and members, this slide just sums up all that our key remarks that we'd like to end this presentation with. And firstly, I think the Commission commends the steps taken by the government to ensure greater alignment between practice and legislation in the education sector. Our analysis focused particularly on the addition of grade R as a compulsory part of the basic education package. And with respect to that particular proposed amendment, the Commission is definitely in support of the greater recognition and integration of ECD into the basic education sector. Based on the DBE's figures and the associated costs of implementing the Bella Bill, it amounts to just under 18 billion. And the FFC has 5 recommendations around the costing. And the first is that in order to ensure a realistic assessment of need, the norm informing the required number of ECD educators should be reconsidered, and that's based on two aspects. Firstly, it runs contrary to the ECD educator-learner ratio, which is 1:30. The cost estimates are based on a 1:40 ratio. So as Fabrice Neo has indicated when he presented, to what extent, can we deliver quality ECD education to young children where class numbers are that high? Secondly, we would suggest that the personnel-related costs, if not considered, they should consider estimates for cost of living adjustments or COLA. And this is critical because the addition of COLA can have fiscus-wide impacts. We've seen with the recent budget that was tabled how reprioritization and cuts have had to be effected to assist particularly provincial education and health departments with the carry-through costs of the wage agreement. Then third, we would recommend that the increase in, given that the increase in learner numbers will prompt an increase in the demand for ablution facilities, LTSM, learner transport, and for meals via the National School Nutrition Program. And given this, the expenditure estimates must factor this in. And then overall, Chair, from a funding perspective, the total costs anticipated as a result of implementing this Bella Bill is coming to the fore at a time when the fiscus is particularly constrained. We've undergone, as I've indicated, various iterations of reprioritization and cuts. And so definitely there must be a funding plan, and we would think there would need to be additional resources flowing to provinces to assist them to implement this bill. And this is obviously key if we want to ensure that we provide quality access to compulsory grade R education. Then finally, there are other costs that are likely to arise due to the requirements for, as Fabrice mentioned, provincial education departments. If the bill is passed, will have to assess school admission and language policies, as well as potentially consult with homeschooling applicants. So we did not see in the DBE's costing document any reflection on those potential costs. Thank you, Chair. I think I'll hand back to Chen. Thank you.
Thanks, Honourable Members and Chair, and we hand back to you for any questions and further engagements on the details of this bill and the implications. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Just so that for those who are watching online, if they are looking for the sections and the page numbers in the bill regarding financial implications for state, that is under section 4 on page 47 and 48. I know the FFC asked us, they don't know whether some of the matters have been costed. I only read 3 sections here. Yes, members, I'm going to take questions now. If none, I have some questions. Okay, I see Member Christian's hand. I don't see any other hands, so I'll then go after Member Christian's. Thank you.
No, thank you, Chair. Just very concerning, of course, the costing. And, it's like we go through this exercise and spend all this money to do the public hearings, and it goes through all the necessary channels. And then you get to a point where you say, even if the ballot bill is passed, it cannot be implemented because there is no money in the fiscus. So I don't know. It's just a general question because, if you look at personnel cost, infrastructure cost, it's and to render then quality education to the grade R learners because it's going to be compulsory. I tell you, I don't know, Chair. It seems to me that we are going through a futile exercise by getting the public all hype up and go to, like we have again a public hearing on Friday, and doing all of this, and then at the end to provide quality education and also to make grade R compulsory. It seems to me that we're not ready, and it cannot be implemented because we don't have the funding. So, Chair, that is just a comment I made because we've been at the public hearing in Paarl, and people is in uproar. There was almost a fight, and the public, is all hyped up. But this cannot. And the question maybe it's a question. According to the commission, the funding, I don't think the funding will be available for a long time to implement the ballot bill, and especially now what they gave us, the grade R. So according to them, if you look at the finances and you look at the costing, when will we get to that point to say, no, we are ready to implement? And I know it's government and all of that, but according to them, because now we're going through all this trouble, and the biggest problem is the parents are all up in arms and everybody's up in arms, but this cannot be implemented because we don't have the money. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. My first question, I want to find out why is it, or why does the FFC believe that it got to 17.7 billion conservatively without the uncosted matters that you've mentioned, and DBE got to approximately 16 billion? And to qualify this statement, I'm just going to read from the actual bill on page 47 and page 48, just so that for those who are looking for the page numbers. Under financial implications, it speaks, the first paragraph, in terms of the provision of grade R, it is estimated that an additional amount of 5.26 billion will be required. The amount is composed of both the funding needed for equalization of conditions of service and funding of appointment of additional educators to address the estimated increased learner enrollment. The calculations are based on the current provisioning of grade R in public schools. So what the FFC seemingly has presented to us is if those extra grade R had to enter into the public school system. So from just the face of it, the bill doesn't seem to include what the FFC has presented to us today. But also that particular paragraph doesn't speak to where the funding will come from. The second paragraph spoke about the additional infrastructure for a total of 7,888 schools still need to be provided with grade R classrooms, and an amount of 12 billion is required to address the shortfall. It then speaks to the shortfall will continue to be funded from the education infrastructure grant, the equitable share and other funding mechanisms to ensure that schools receive the requisite spaces to accommodate the grade R learners. Now, I'm not sure how feasible that may be, since National Treasury sent us a letter last week regarding the bill being unfunded. And then the last paragraph under the financial implications only speak to, on page 48 of the bill, home education assessment costs have been divided into two categories, namely the sourcing, preparing of exam papers and marking of scripts, and invigilation, a suggested rate of 100 Rand per hour for marking of scripts and 150 Rand could be added for sourcing and preparing of papers. The estimated cost of invigilators is 40 Rand per hour. The bearers of these costs will be the parents. These are the only three sections in the bill under the memorandum speaking to the financial implications. Then, when we look at the added uncosted considerations that you have brought to our attention, these relate to the cost of living adjustments, or COLA, the LSTM, which refers to learner teacher support materials such as books, charts, models, stationery, and so forth, learner transport, nutrition, special education needs education, including possible extra assistive devices. And we know special education needs on average is more expensive than public ordinary schools. Administrative costs and costs relating to the PEDs regarding homeschooling all seems to be unfunded. Now, if this was costed, would this mean that conservatively the implementation or the costing of this bill might actually exceed even 18 billion Rand? Then I just want to find out, in your estimations, you estimated that additional teachers just for year one, not taking into account later years, is 2.7 billion Rand. Does your 17.7 billion Rand include the projections for year 2 and year 3? And then finally, in terms of the uncosted considerations as well as those that have been costed so far, where does the FFC think DBE might find this money or funding from? At the moment in the National Parliament, for example, we are seeing a bill where unfortunately we have to sell off some of our gold reserves in order to essentially keep the metaphorical house of South Africa. So I'm not too sure when it comes to equitable share that if we're already selling off some of our gold reserves, where we're going to find this extra money or funding from. Because to my knowledge, in the national budget, the Bella Bill's costing has not yet been costed for in the current financial year. Thank you. I don't see any other hands. Let me just reach quickly. Yes, I don't see any other hands, Mr. Cheng, and your delegation, you can allocate the questions accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, the chair members, for the questions. I think let me actually do it in a bit different than usual. I shall ask Sasha to first take a quick look at the specifics of the costing. I think there is significant gaps and in the particulars of the estimates. And in terms of the projections, though, I think we also what we have done was a simple linear projections and from the current states. So what we call the naive estimates. We haven't also taken into account in terms of the population pyramid or any kind of the demand, and which we did also emphasize that the costing needs to have that first demand analysis, quantity demand analysis, and then go into the supply side to see how that matches up, but with that, let me give to Sasha and team first, and then I'll come back in at the last in terms of the more macro fiscal implications in terms of the IGFR related. So Sasha, over to you.
Thank you, Chairperson and members, for the questions. So just with respect to the figures, Chairperson, we received a document that was titled Costing of the Financial Implications of Provisioning of Additional Grade R Educators as a Result of the Proposed Available Revisions, as well as one that looked at the cost to government for the introduction of Grade R and the provision of Grade R infrastructure, which I think was also provided to the committee. We received it from the committee secretary as part of the package of documents that we use to base our calculations on. So the figures that you see regarding the cost estimates are the DBE's cost estimates. So, for example, when we talk about the 5.2 billion with respect to personnel, that's based on, and I'm not sure if members have this, the document that I'm referring to, but on page 4 of that document, it indicates, the DBE indicates that 2.6 billion is required to bring the pay scales of ECD educators up to the level of the educators in the rest of the basic education sector. Then on page 7 of that document, another 2.6 billion is required for the employment of additional ECD educators. So that gives us 5.2 billion. And then for the infrastructure cost estimates, according to the DBE's document, that's 12 billion, which would give you just over 17 billion. And then with respect to the additional items, what we are indicating is that in their costing document, they don't indicate that, for example, that additions are going to be made to the National School Nutrition Program so that we can feed these additional learners in your quintiles 1, 2, and 3 schools. The costing document doesn't, for example, speak to the increased manpower that may be required should your provincial education departments need to assess education assess language and admission policies. Whilst, Chair, you are right that there is an indication of costs with respect to homeschooling, it doesn't factor in the costs that may arise due to what is being proposed in terms of the provincial education departments going out to consult with homeschooling applicants, because there is a provision in the bill that speaks to, the fact that home visits may need to be done during the application process. So those additional items, we are saying we didn't see that coming through. And then even with respect to, whilst 12 billion, for example, is budgeted for infrastructure, we only see mention being made of classrooms, but yet grade R learners need very different ablution facilities, age-appropriate toilets and basins and that sort of thing. So we saw mention of classrooms. We didn't see mention of ablution type infrastructure, or as Fabrice indicated, infrastructure related to additional security, because as you know, the grade R area in a school is usually sort of well cordoned off to protect those younger learners. So our figures are based on the projections of the DBE. and what they indicated they are factoring in terms of costs. So we've looked at that and said, okay, but we don't see mention made of ablution. We don't see we don't see a mention made of yearly adjustments in terms of, for example, COLA. And then we see nothing related to the National School Nutrition Program or learner transport, for example. So yeah, I just wanted to clear that up, Chair. Yeah, so it's totally based on the projections of the DBE. Thank you.
Right, and I think just in terms of then what to do, as Honourable Member Christians has asked, I think, I think it's also set as a preset that there is definitely a level or degree of coordination failures, even on part of the legislative process and procedure, that these bills don't talk to each other, and this does detract in general terms, right, that from the constitutional mandates and spirit and interpretation thereof, that actually all legislation in South Africa and all legislation law in general ought to be costed. And that is a requirement in terms of the constitution. And yet, with what we see now is that there are some degree or attempts of costing, but there are always gaps from different various departments. And then you then come to the coordination parts or more focused, where then a National Treasury says, oh, this is unfunded, and then what? So in terms of the provincial governments and departments of education and Minister of Education for the province, I think there are, despite these difficult situations and with the unfunded and uncosted legislation, I think the advice would be to try and let's think creatively and innovate within. Because it is one thing that we can lament as much and advise as much in terms of the legislation, but we also have to think, I think, from an oversight as well as execute the sort of the executive point of view, is that it's that kids need to go to school and that the education system has to carry on. So that's where we come to best practices and or alternative models, create innovative models. So overseas, what we've seen is, and as FFC in terms of our research, is that the schools do tend in terms of the formal schooling years, do tend to get longer. However, and also, in trying to sort of deep into both the younger ages as well as the older ages, and then crisscrossing in between. So in other words, allow students to even even say older students to kind of stay on or come back. So those programs do exist. It comes to the question about the use of facilities, because schools are not always open all the time. And also, and with regards to, say, the younger schooling age children, then they do tend to be integrated in terms of the infrastructure of the schools, but it's done more at the school level and is done very sort of diverse and integrated approach to it. So you will see certain schools where they have the potential to kind of sort of expand a little bit more or easier to leverage some of the basic infrastructure that are already on the ground to just make it bigger or make it renew it, refurbish it, and revamp it, and or as we have seen certain cases, they will separate it, like in China, they separate the times of going to schools. So in other words, so you might have, say, grade 11 come 10 to 2, and then the 12s go from, 3 to 8, things like that. So they do that kind of crisscrossing, and then to kind of spread out the systems and infrastructure use across those times. And those are the innovations that kind of is, I think, allowable in terms of our structures. But of course, I cannot emphasize this stronger, is that it ought to be a differentiated approach. It depends on what kind of structure is already there. So for example, I wouldn't expect, for instance, say Westerford, to take on certain projects. Meanwhile, they also expect another, schools in previously disadvantaged communities, and literally are even struggling with the basic, the evolutions facilities to take on more students and things like that. And so then brings it into the question, which also in terms of submission, is two particular input items into the education production function, right? One is the teacher-learner materials, and the other one is transport. And this is, again, within the province, some integration or collaboration also can be considered to work out what's that kind of transport systems or logistical arrangements that can be done with the various provincial departments, and in considering that it does, they're all interrelated within the province. And also, I think from the funding perspective, more in terms of the IGFR and also fiscal framework of sorts, Chair, you're right, we have recently digged into, and in fact, this morning even, we were briefing the Select Committee on Appropriations on this particular, we call it a JFECRA, but basically, yes, we are selling gold and foreign exchange reserve in the dollars, the euros, and all the other Swiss franc, all of it, just so that we can take some money and then pay off our debt. And then the purpose of that debt is, or the accumulation of that debt is due to, in the main, government guarantees that and exposures that have occurred over the years. And so from a fiscal perspective, indeed, there aren't any more monies that we can hope for or to try and gather in that sense. However, at the same time, as Financial Fiscal Commission, similarly, and in withstanding its the stance to the Select Committee, is that in and between this entire system of intergovernmental relations system, there are a lot of reserves sitting in between the governments, spheres of governments, and different departments, as reserves and cash and funds that are available, and that are not used efficiently, in the sense that it's just sitting there idle. And if we're going to use that, we're not also advocating that just use it once off, because this thing clearly is not going to be a once-off spending. But what we're saying is that there are certain, say, low-hanging fruits, and that's why also innovation and also creative use of and within and arrangements of implementation and activities, those the sort of low-hanging fruits of investment opportunities can be considered with using these reserves. And also with combining with that is also the reprioritization that has to happen, not just at the national level, in terms of the appropriations or the division of revenue bill, but also within provinces, that between those social and economic functions of the province, that reprioritization can come into play. And so effectively, we're saying that as FFC is that we'll continue the examination and scrutiny of this bill and its implications. We are not shying away from it, so we cannot, as the Constitution mandates us. At the same time, though, take it as an opportunity also, because we do have to make sure that we carry on with the education system, and that those are the various as advice and recommendations that we can consider implementing and exploring within, so that we don't fail the future of South Africa in the education sector. Honourable Chair and members, I hope that covers, but second round also welcomed.
Thank you so much. I just want to check if there are any other hands for the second round. Otherwise, I just have a two follow-up questions, because my concern, and I haven't heard any of the members or any of the public being opposed in general regarding grade R. And the principle of grade R, I think, is very different to the costing and implementation, the financial implementation of grade R. In terms of, you mentioned that there's a legal requirement regarding the costing of legislation. If you could just please refresh our memory in terms of the specific rule and or sections, if it's in the Constitution. And then secondly, if a bill is not fully or adequately costed based on what you've mentioned, does this essentially raise a constitutional concern or issue? Because when I see 17.7 billion rand as a figure in front of me, conservatively, without the other possible uncosted matters, and it is not for an MTEF, it's essentially for a more or less financial year for the country, then the first question I have to ask myself is, are we going to now have to start deciding between building schools for the current primary and high school classes or grade R? In the Western Cape, for example, we top up the nutrition program with extra funding from our provincial reserves. So then the question is going to be is, do we have to then cut nutrition in order to make provision for grade R? With the public wages, and FFC will know because this has been discussed in budget as well, we were supposed to get 2.9 billion rand for public wages in the Western Cape. We received 1.7. So there's approximately between 1.1 and 1.2 billion rand that was not received. It's not only the Western Cape. And similarly, no one is saying that people do not deserve the respective increases or respective wages. What is concerning is, given the current fiscal environment, whether one can afford it, whether one can truly and honestly look at one's current budget and say that we have money for this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So with regards to the cost, that it's in the spirit of the word or operative word, that is the effective use of resources. And for instance, Chapter 10, 195 of the Constitution does mention the effective use, the efficient, economic, and effective use. 1B, that is, of resources must be promoted. And that is in terms of the spirit of that. You can't, well, one is hard pressed to think of how to be efficient or ensuring efficiency and effective use of resources without knowing what is the costing of that exercise. And then also in terms throughout the entire PFMA, which also follows from the mandate of or the law of the Constitution, that there is a section, I'll search for it and reply in writing, that all legislation ought to be costed, as long as it's using public funds, and it makes sense that it needs to be costed. And in terms of the reprioritizations and exercise, it's one aspect, I think, and it's the same. We were briefing the various committees at national parliament, is that reprioritization exercise is not a sort of X to Y kind of sort of item X to item Y exercise. Because there are so many items inside and expenditure items within the budget. And so in order to do that exercise of where, how, and reallocations and efficiencies, further work actually really has to go into it before one can make that sort of taking Y, giving X determination. The other thing, which, however, I can say that FFC is in the activity of researching this particular aspect, is to look at the discrepancy between the budget and the actual expenditure at the end of the financial year. We think that, and also this is why I say that there is, we are certain, because we've seen the numbers, that every year there is so much cash left over. Operating, the actual term is actually cash balance after operating activities of the financial year, of the various spheres. The financial institutions, non-financial institutions, entities, the province, provincial level, local level, and national departments. So we are initiating this exercise to really look at the actual expenditures versus the budget, and in order to explore deeper in terms of the budget line items. Well, firstly is the alignment between the budget to implementation and or expenditure, right? But second is then is to unpack that reserve. What is this leftover surplus that we keep on seeing every single year? And that reserve actually has been accumulating over the past many years. Specifically, it was growing at a very, very fast pace since actually, and strangely, financial crisis of 2008-09, and even throughout the whole of the crash of say the COVID and others as leftovers. So we are doing that research in order to unpack that reserve and also unpack where are the actual places where that possible funds could be derived from, and to also then to affect a better efficiency in terms of the allocations and the reallocations thereof. I think I guess the first part will please give us some time, and I'll actually do a more of a thorough legal research because I'm not not trained in the legal field, but there was that. So we'll reply formally in writing to give it a full answer, if you allow it, Chair.
Thank you so much. I just want to check if there are any other hands. Okay, before I then get to the committee matters, I actually want to ask, I would like us to please take a photo of this historic meeting. So for those who are able to maybe put their cameras on, Ms. Hassan Musa, I'm not sure if you can take a screenshot of the meeting so that one day when a researcher is going through the Western Cape archives, that they can find a photo of the first ever calling of the FFC on non-money / financial legislation, but regarding finance and fiscal matters. So if there's anyone from either our committee and or the FFC or other persons who wish to put their camera on, I want as many people as possible who choose to be part of this historic meeting. Okay, Ms. Hassan Musa, I just want to check, are you able to take either a screenshot or a photo of the meeting?
I'm taking multiple photos, Chair, as we are speaking.
Okay. So when we smile, we're going to say FFC or finance.
That it?
Just maybe take another one or two.
Okay, we've got it.
Thank you so much. And just again to the full delegation of the FFC, truly, truly thank you. When I put the resolution to the committee and the committee agreed, I wasn't sure whether you'd have enough time to be able to put some of the information or comments or your thoughts together for the meeting. I know the FFC has a lot of work, especially when it comes to annual division of revenue and other money bills matters. But I'm hoping that today will be the start of not only the Western Cape Provincial Parliament, but other legislatures taking the costing, the financial implications, and the funding on legislation seriously, because money does matter. Thank you so much. With that, I'm just going to ask if we allow to Mr. Teng just to include the FFC's comments as part of our written submission matrix.
Absolutely, Chair. Thank you. It would be most appreciated, and thanks again for this opportunity. We're at your beck call anytime.
No problem. Perfect. Thank you so much. So we will then include that in our particular matrix, and you are excused to go about your day-to-day activities. Members, if we can just please remain behind for some committee administration. I have 2 general feedback matters, and then just hang on quickly. So just, I know I'm trying my best to give you as much feedback as possible. So as at today, we've had 3,281 written submissions, 1,604 online submissions, 402 WhatsApp submissions, which bring our non-oral submission total to 5,287. Currently, our attendance so far at public hearings bring us to 2,535 people. And we still have the Saldanha Bay public hearing coming up, as well as 2 for Cape Town on the 4th. And then the second feedback for members is just we were supposed to have DBE before the committee yesterday, also on costing and funding, but they requested postponement for more time. And after engaging Programming Authority, we were able to get a time for Friday morning from 9 until 12. I just want to check that is correct. Yes, that is correct, 9 till 12. So we will then have that meeting at that stage. And then members, I just want to ask, I've been informed that the NCOP has declined our request for extension of the negotiating mandate despite it not affecting the final mandate date. And I would like to ask whether it is possible for you to allow us just a suspension of the meeting for 15 minutes, as legal would like to brief me on now what. Because the NCOP's negotiating mandate date, after our 3 letters, it is sent out from their side for, I think it's the 27th of March, Ms. Hassan Musa, if I'm correct?
Yes, Chair, that's correct, 27th of March.
Yes, and even though they have not replied to our letter formally yet, I'm informed that today they've taken the decision not to extend the negotiating mandate date. So members, I just want to find out if it's in order for us just to suspend the meeting for 15 minutes so that I'm able to get feedback for you and make sure that legal is able to advise us going forward. Member. Thank you so much. Any other member have comments or?
No, in order, Chair, in order.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to firstly give it a second or two just for the respective officials to also join me back into the meeting, and also just apologies for the delay in the suspension time. Ms. Hassan Musa?
Chair, I just wanted to ask Siraj to lower the break on the YouTube link and restart it, please.
Perfect, thank you so much. We just wait and we just check if everyone's in the current meeting. And then Mr. Hassam, if you can just let us know when we're back online. Ms. Hassan Musa?
Sorry, my mistake.
No problem.
Chair, we live?
Perfect. Thank you so much. Colleagues, just again, thank you for allowing for the suspension just so that we could receive advice. I will now put forward the advice I've received, and I'm going to ask Advocate Master just to come in if I've forgotten anything in this regard. So the NCOP is asking for its mandate, the negotiating mandate, on the 27th of March. It is also asking us for our final mandate on the 17th of April. According to my calendar, when I open it up, there's a 3-week difference. So 27th is next week, Wednesday. 27th until the 3rd is 1 week. To the 10th is 2 weeks. To the 17th is 3 weeks. So there's a 3-week difference between when the province's negotiating mandate needs to be in and the province's final mandate need to be in. Now, as you are all aware, previously the committee resolved to have 12 public hearings, and then in order to accommodate shortened and possible timelines, we then indicated, okay, 7 public hearings. And as you all would know, we've indicated also an extra public hearing on the 4th in order to accommodate those observing the month of Ramadan. Now, colleagues, we would have concluded 6 public hearings by the 27th, which includes Saldanha, which is this Friday, but we don't want the voice of the people of the Western Cape to be ignored or lost. So the advice received, and Advocate Marsthorpe can come in, is for us to request possibly that maybe if the negotiating mandate date can be extended to either the 5th or the 8th of April, that would be the Friday after the last public hearing or the Monday after the last public hearing, in order for us to submit our negotiating mandate. And also to put on letter to ask the NCOP what would the legal effect be if our negotiating mandate was submitted after the 27th of March, but before the final mandate, essentially, as there will be still time before the final mandate, regarding that status of such a mandate post 27 March. But also then, I forgot something now. It is the 5th/8th. It is the letter requiring what our mandate position would be, the status. Yes, I think I got both. Advocate Master, maybe I did forget something because I wrote down 1, 2, 3, and now I'm only got to 2.
It was just those 2, Chairperson. Those 2 issues that you did raise now. The one is notwithstanding the refusal to give us an extension, we in fact request as a committee our speaker to again engage the select committee on the other side for an extension. We can finalize the dates, that's just detail. And secondly, what if they do not give us an extension? What would be the status of our mandate should be submitted after the 5th, sorry, after the 27th of March? Will they still factor it into the general matrix of mandates from all the provinces, and whether our mandate will just become inconsequential or fatal because we didn't submit it by the 27th? So one, we ask for a further extension, and even if they don't give it, what would be the legal standing or status of our mandate if we give it after the cutoff date? And I want to recommend that we go this route so that if need be, in due course, when this matter may become litigious, that we have it on record, Chairperson, that we tried everything within our legal power to extract some latitude from the select committee to make sure that the voice of the general public in the province is actually heard as far as this bill is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I remembered my third point. It was on the NHI bill where the committee asked for a special date for the Western Cape mandate to be heard, and it was granted. So there is precedence for allowing a province to have a special date to hear their mandate should they run into such problems. Am I correct in this regard, regarding the precedence?
Yes, certainly. That will certainly corroborate an argument, but the 2 points I made were just new points for a new correspondence. But the point you made now as a third point is certainly in corroboration of those 2 points. Yes.
Thank you so much. Mr. Daza?
Chair, just to correct, the committee didn't ask for a special date. It was the NCOP Select Committee voluntarily felt that they need to give the Western Cape another opportunity to submit its mandate. So they did that out of their own. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so that is also corroboration that it is possible for the NCOP actually to give us a special date, even voluntarily out of
Yes, yes, Chairperson.
Okay. Members, it is now up to you to tell me what to do. Do I follow this advice? Would you want me to follow this advice? Is this the advice we're taking and going forward on? Members Fryer and members Christians, I see your hands.
So, Chair, yes, I propose that we take the advice as noted by the senior procedure officer, as well as the legal advisor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Member Christians.
I second that, Chair. I'll second that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Member Poole.
Yes, Chair, I'm a second on Member Fullen.
Thank you so much. And just for the record, I think it is good advice for us to follow regarding the fourth correspondence, regarding movement of the negotiating mandate date, the questions that legal put in their nice English for us regarding legal standing of mandate after 27th, as well as citing some of the previous precedents on Section 76 legislation. Colleagues, we are at 4 o'clock. I'm not sure if there are any resolutions in this regard. I don't see any hands or bubbles. If none, then please just be reminded that our next meeting is on Friday morning with the DBE on costing and funding of the bill. And I will attempt my best to give you further feedback on Friday's meeting as well. Thank you so much. The meeting is adjourned.